The town of Willow Creek was the kind of place that seemed untouched by time. Cobblestone streets wove between quaint houses, and the air was thick with the scent of freshly baked bread from the local bakery. It was a peaceful town, where nothing out of the ordinary seemed to happen. But hidden beneath the serene surface, stories brewed that no one dared to imagine. Every morning, Officer Ryan strolled into the town's cafe for his routine coffee. He was a comforting figure, broad-shouldered with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that made him approachable. The locals knew him by name, often chatting about mundane matters. To Ryan, Willow Creek was a predictable beat, a quiet corner of the world where nothing much went wrong. But fate had plans to shatter that illusion. Far from the town square, tucked behind a modest brick house, lived Sophia, a girl whose life once mirrored the simplicity of Willow Creek. Her laughter had once filled the rooms of her home, harmonizing with her mother's warm voice and her father's deep chuckles. But that was before her mother's sudden illness stole her away. Sophia's world unraveled the day her mother died. The house that had once been a haven of love turned hollow and cold. Her father, Michael, retreated into himself, his grief consuming him. In his loneliness, he made a choice, one he believed would bring stability back to their fractured home. He married Julia. At first, Julia appeared to be the answer. She was polite, charming even, and seemed eager to take on the role of stepmother. But as time passed, her mask began to slip. The warmth she displayed to Michael turned to frost when she was alone with Sophia. Julia's control over the household grew insidiously. She imposed rigid rules, her voice sharp and unyielding. The cheerful energy that had once filled the house dimmed under her oppressive presence. Sophia felt her father slipping further away, blinded by Julia's carefully curated facade. Sophia's room became her sanctuary, the only space where she could still hold on to fragments of her past life. But even there, the weight of Julia's coldness seeped in. The girl who had once danced in the sunlit yard now sat in silence, her vibrant laughter replaced by the quiet scratch of pencil on paper, a desperate attempt to capture a piece of the life she had lost. And so, Willow Creek's peaceful facade hid the storm brewing within Sophia's home, where a silent battle for survival began. The idyllic town was about to witness a darkness it had never known. The days in Willow Creek rolled on as if nothing had changed, but inside the modest brick house, the shadows deepened. Michael, consumed by his grief and the mounting responsibilities of his career, began spending long hours at work. He convinced himself that providing financial stability was the best way to protect his daughter, unaware of the storm brewing in his absence. Julia played her role with Oscar-worthy precision. When Michael was home, she was attentive, warm even. She packed his lunches, asked about his day, and fussed over Sophia in front of him. To an outsider, she was the picture-perfect stepmother. But when Michael left for work, her demeanor shifted like a snap of cold wind. At first, it was small things. Julia would offer Sophia icy stares that lingered just a second too long. Her words were clipped, devoid of the kindness she showed to Michael. Sophia tried to ignore the unease growing in her chest, chalking it up to the awkwardness of their new family dynamic. But Julia's intentions soon became clear. Rules began appearing out of nowhere, each more oppressive than the last. Chores had to be done with military precision, beds made without a single wrinkle, dishes scrubbed until they gleamed. Sophia, still adjusting to her new reality, did her best to comply, but it was never enough for Julia. "Do you think this is acceptable?" Julia sneered one morning, holding up a plate with the faintest smear of soap. "You're useless. Clean it again. No breakfast until it's spotless." Sophia's stomach twisted with hunger, but she bit her lip and obeyed. This became routine. If Julia deemed a task unsatisfactory, meals were withheld. The kitchen, once filled with the comforting aroma of her mother's cooking, became a place of dread. As the weeks passed, Julia's cruelty escalated. She started punishing Sophia physically but with calculated precision. A sudden yank on her ear for speaking out of turn, a slap across the back of her head for spilling water on the floor. Julia always made sure to avoid leaving visible marks. Bruises could raise questions, but it was the words that cut the deepest. "You're such a burden," Julia hissed one evening after Sophia accidentally knocked over a vase. "Your father would be so much happier without you dragging him down." The tears that welled up in Sophia's eyes only fueled Julia's venom. "Oh, don't cry, it's pathetic." Sophia retreated to her room, clutching her sketchbook like a lifeline. Her once vibrant drawings of sunny days and smiling faces had been replaced by dark, chaotic lines. She sketched a faceless woman towering over a small, crumpled figure. She didn't need to name them. The truth was all too clear. Michael remained blind to what was happening under his roof. Julia's carefully crafted facade kept him oblivious, and Sophia, terrified of making things worse, didn't dare speak up. But every insult, every slap, and every missed meal carved deeper wounds into Sophia's spirit. The small, happy girl she once was seemed to fade with each passing day. Still, a flicker of resilience remained, small but unyielding. Sophia's world had become a muted blur of pain and isolation. Every day was a cycle of fear, enduring Julia's insults and punishments while longing for the father who seemed a shadow of his former self. But in the depths of her despair, Sophia discovered a lifeline, a refuge where her voice, silenced by fear, could find expression. It began one quiet evening when Julia's mocking words echoed in her ears long after the woman had stormed out of the room. Alone, trembling, Sophia picked up a pencil and opened her sketchbook. At first, her hand moved hesitantly across the page, creating rough, jagged lines. But as her emotions poured out, the lines formed shapes that spoke louder than words ever could. She drew a small figure huddled in the corner of a dark room, faceless yet unmistakably herself. Above it loomed a shadowy figure with sharp, menacing features, towering like a storm cloud. Tears blurred Sophia's vision as she added the final details. The chains encircling the small figure's ankles, the broken heart etched in the corner. From that moment on, drawing became her sanctuary. Her sketchbook became a canvas for her pain, a place where she could release the emotions that suffocated her. She drew her anguish as dark clouds blotting out the sun. She sketched Julia's cutting words as jagged arrows piercing her heart. But Sophia's art wasn't just an outlet. It was a language. As the days passed, her drawings grew bolder, more specific. She began to capture moments of Julia's cruelty, though always in symbolic form. One drawing showed Julia as a monstrous giant, her eyes burning with rage, gripping a chain that led to a trembling child. Another depicted the house itself, its windows barred, trapping a lonely figure inside. Sophia realized that her art wasn't just her voice, it could be a weapon. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. What if someone could see her pain through these drawings? What if they understood the silent cries she couldn't bring herself to utter? Her chance came one sunny morning when she saw Officer Ryan at the cafe. She had been watching him for weeks, studying his kind, approachable demeanor. He seemed different from the other adults, attentive, patient. He might actually care. For weeks, she debated whether to take the risk. What if he didn't believe her? What if Julia found out? But each day under Julia's rule strengthened her resolve. She had to try. The night before, Sophia selected one of her most powerful drawings, a stark depiction of her pain. It showed a small, crying child surrounded by a suffocating black cloud. In the corner, a towering figure loomed, a hand raised menacingly. That morning, clutching the folded sketch in trembling hands, Sophia approached Officer Ryan as he sipped his coffee. She lingered nearby, waiting for the perfect moment when he looked away. With her heart pounding like a drum, she slipped the paper into his pocket and darted away before he could turn around. Sophia's steps quickened as she put distance between herself and the cafe. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drumbeat, her palms still damp with sweat from the daring act. For a fleeting moment, she wanted to turn back, to snatch the note from Officer Ryan's pocket before he could find it. But it was too late now. Inside the cafe, Officer Ryan stood at the counter, exchanging pleasantries with the barista. He reached for his wallet, and as his hand brushed his jacket pocket, he felt something unfamiliar. Frowning, he pulled out the folded piece of paper. Ryan's eyes scanned the crude lines of the drawing, his casual demeanor shifting to one of alarm. The image was haunting. A small child curled in the corner of a room, her tear-streaked face barely visible beneath the heavy strokes that outlined a menacing figure towering above her. Around the edges were fragmented symbols, broken hearts, chains, storm clouds. He stared at the paper for a moment, frozen. The emotions in the drawing were palpable. Fear, pain, a desperate plea for help. He glanced out the cafe window, scanning the street, but the girl who had slipped him the note was nowhere to be seen. Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his radio and stepped outside. "Dispatch, this is Officer Ryan. I have a situation that needs immediate attention. I'll need backup and child services on standby." His voice was calm but firm, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his shoulders. The cafe buzzed on as usual, but Ryan's mind raced. He folded the drawing carefully and slipped it back into his pocket, resolving to find out who had reached out to him in such a desperate way. He knew he couldn't ignore it. Something about the image struck too deep, too raw to be a fabrication. Within an hour, Ryan had gathered the resources he needed to begin his investigation. He canvassed the area, showing the sketch to a few shop owners, asking if anyone recognized the girl. No one had seen much, but a bakery worker recalled a quiet girl with a solemn face who often passed by on her way home from school. Ryan pieced together the little information he had and began knocking on doors. It wasn't long before he found himself standing outside a modest brick house with peeling paint. The curtains were drawn tightly, and the yard looked unkempt, a stark contrast to the pristine homes around it. Sophia watched from her bedroom window, her heart leaping into her throat as she spotted Officer Ryan approaching. Panic surged through her. What if Julia answered the door? What if the drawing only made things worse? Inside, Ryan knocked firmly. After a moment, the door creaked open, and there stood Julia, her expression carefully neutral. "Can I help you, officer?" she asked, her voice polite but tinged with caution. "I'm here to follow up on a concern involving a child at this address," Ryan replied, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of guilt. Julia's expression didn't falter. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Everything is fine here," she said smoothly, but Ryan's instincts told him otherwise. He glanced over Julia's shoulder and caught a glimpse of Sophia's wide, frightened eyes peeking from the top of the staircase before she vanished into the shadows. Ryan knew then that he wouldn't leave without answers. Julia's lips curled into a polite but dismissive smile as Officer Ryan stepped into the house. Her calm facade was impeccable, the picture of a concerned stepmother. "I'm not sure what this is about, officer," she said smoothly, her tone light, almost casual. "But I assure you everything is fine. Sophia can be difficult at times. She's been struggling since her mother passed." Ryan's gaze didn't waver, though inside his frustration grew. He could see through Julia's carefully constructed act, but without evidence, confronting her outright would get him nowhere. He turned to Michael, who had joined them in the living room, his face lined with confusion and doubt. "She's lying," Sophia whispered from the staircase, her voice barely audible. She clutched the railing as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "She hurts me." Julia's demeanor hardened for a fraction of a second before she sighed dramatically. "Sophia, darling, why are you making up such awful stories? You know I love you," she said, her voice dripping with false affection. "She's just acting out," Julia continued, addressing Ryan. "It's been hard for her since her mother died, and she resents me for stepping in." Michael shifted uncomfortably. His eyes flicked between Julia and Sophia, uncertainty clouding his expression. "Sophia, sweetheart," he said softly, "are you sure you're not just confused? Julia's been trying her best." Sophia's heart sank. She looked at her father, her last hope, and saw only doubt. Ryan, sensing the delicate balance of the moment, stepped in. "We take all concerns seriously, Mrs. Harrington," he said firmly. "To ensure Sophia's safety, we'll be monitoring the situation. If nothing is amiss, you have nothing to worry about." Julia's smile froze, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Of course," she said tightly. "Anything to prove there's no issue." Within days, the police installed hidden cameras throughout the house. They were placed discreetly, designed to capture the truth that Julia worked so hard to conceal. But Julia wasn't naive. She noticed the officers' movements, the slight shifts in furniture, the new angles of the room. For the first few days, she was careful. Her tone softened around Sophia, and the punishments stopped. Julia played the role of the perfect stepmother with renewed vigor, preparing meals and speaking gently. But Sophia wasn't fooled. She knew Julia was simply waiting, watching for the police's interest to wane. Julia's control didn't weaken, it adapted. Instead of her usual tactics, she found new ways to inflict harm. One morning, Julia announced she and Sophia would go for a drive. Michael was in his study, oblivious as they left. The car ride was silent at first, the engine's hum the only sound. Then Julia's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the steering wheel. "Getting the police involved. Do you know what you've done to this family?" Sophia shrank into her seat, her heart racing. Julia pulled the car off the road into a secluded wooded area. She slammed on the brakes, the sudden jolt making Sophia lurch forward. Turning to face her, Julia's mask dropped entirely. Her eyes burned with fury as she slapped Sophia across the face, the sharp sting leaving her cheek red and raw. "This is your fault," Julia spat. "If they come back, it's because you can't keep your mouth shut. Do you think anyone will believe you over me?" Sophia didn't cry. She stared at Julia, her resolve hardening despite the pain. Julia's words echoed in the quiet car, but Sophia clung to a single thought. Ryan believes me. The tension within the Harrington household had reached a fever pitch. Weeks of surveillance had yielded little evidence, leaving Officer Ryan frustrated but unwilling to give up. He replayed hours of footage, scanning every shadow for a hint of Julia's true nature. And then, it happened. It was late one night when Ryan sat in the dim glow of his office, reviewing yet another clip from the hidden cameras. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, and his eyes burned from the strain. Suddenly, the grainy footage showed movement in Sophia's room. Julia stormed in, her face contorted with rage. The muffled sound of her voice reached the camera's microphone, but it was the gestures that spoke louder than words. She grabbed Sophia by the arm and yanked her forward, the force sending the girl stumbling. The sight was enough to make Ryan's pulse quicken, but what happened next froze him in his seat. Julia raised her hand and struck Sophia across the face, the slap reverberating in the silence of the video. But she wasn't done. She shoved Sophia so hard that the girl fell backward, her head hitting the sharp corner of the nightstand with a sickening thud. Sophia crumpled to the floor, motionless. Ryan's hand clenched into a fist. The video paused at the exact moment of impact, and the room was suddenly too quiet. He knew this was it, the undeniable evidence they had been searching for. Julia, unaware that her actions had been caught on tape, panicked when she saw Sophia lying still on the floor. Her breaths came in ragged gasps as she stared at the unconscious girl. For a brief, horrifying moment, Julia contemplated her options. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on a heavy rug in the corner. She moved toward it, her mind racing with desperate, dark thoughts. But as she reached down, she heard a faint sound behind her, a soft, pained moan. Sophia stirred, her hand weakly reaching for her head. She was alive. Julia froze, her plan evaporating as quickly as it had formed. The girl's survival felt like a double-edged sword, relief mixed with dread. "You listened to me," Julia hissed, leaning down close to Sophia's ear. Her voice was low and venomous. "If you tell anyone what happened, I'll make sure your father suffers. Do you understand?" Sophia blinked through the haze of pain, her body trembling. But something shifted in her eyes. Julia's threat, meant to instill fear, only strengthened Sophia's resolve. Ryan wasted no time. Within minutes, a team was assembled, and they descended on the Harrington home with urgency. The quiet streets of Willow Creek were disrupted by the flashing lights of police cars as they pulled up to the house. Michael opened the door, his confusion turning to shock as officers entered. "What's going on?" he demanded, but Ryan brushed past him, his focus unwavering. They found Julia in the living room, trying to appear calm, but the slight tremor in her hands betrayed her. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Ryan's gaze was cold. "We've seen enough, Julia. It's over." Upstairs, another officer gently escorted Sophia from her room. Her face was pale, and a faint bruise was visible on her temple, but her eyes held a glimmer of relief. Julia's composure finally cracked as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "You have no right!" she screamed, her voice rising in desperation. "She's lying! She's manipulating all of you!" But her protests fell on deaf ears. The evidence was irrefutable, and the predator who had tormented Sophia for so long was finally being held accountable. As Julia was led out of the house, Sophia stood by Officer Ryan, her small hand gripping his sleeve. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt safe. The house that had been silent for so long was now buzzing with activity. Officers moved carefully through each room, gathering evidence and documenting every detail. Sophia sat on the couch in the living room, her small frame wrapped in a blanket provided by one of the officers. She clung to it tightly, her wide eyes darting toward her father, who stood frozen near the door. Michael's face was a mask of confusion and dread. He turned to Officer Ryan, his voice shaky. "What is going on here? This has to be some sort of misunderstanding." Ryan's expression softened, though his resolve did not falter. "Mr. Harrington," he said firmly, "you need to see this." He handed Michael a folder containing copies of Sophia's drawings. Michael's hands trembled as he flipped through the images. Each stroke of pencil, every jagged line, told a story of torment that he had been too blind to see. The monstrous figure towering over the small child, the broken hearts, the storm clouds. He saw Julia in every cruel symbol. But it was the surveillance footage that shattered him. The officer pressed play on the tablet, and Michael's eyes widened as he watched Julia storm into Sophia's room, her rage palpable even through the grainy video. He flinched as he saw the slap, the violent shove, and the sickening moment when Sophia's head struck the nightstand. "No," Michael whispered, his voice cracking. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The weight of guilt bore down on him like a crushing tide. How had he missed this? How had he let this happen under his own roof? Ryan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You weren't looking for it," he said gently. "But now you know, and you can make it right." Julia sat in the back of a police car, her hands cuffed tightly behind her. The calm facade she had worn for so long was gone, replaced by a mixture of rage and desperation. "This is ridiculous," she screamed. "You can't do this. It's her fault. She's lying." Her protests were ignored as the car pulled away, the flashing red and blue lights illuminating the street. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, whispering as they watched Julia being driven away. For Sophia, the sight was both surreal and liberating. The woman who had terrorized her for so long was finally being held accountable. The handcuffs on Julia's wrists were more than a symbol of justice. They were a promise that the nightmare was over. Sophia sat quietly as Ryan knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he said, his voice steady and kind. Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of fear or pain. They were tears of relief. For the first time in years, the oppressive weight on her chest began to lift. Her father approached hesitantly, his face etched with regret. "Sophia," he started, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. I should have protected you." Sophia looked up at him, her small face pale but resolute. She didn't say anything, but she leaned into his arms, allowing herself to feel the warmth of his embrace. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a start. The night was long, filled with questions, paperwork, and plans for Sophia's immediate care. But as the first rays of dawn broke through the curtains, Sophia felt something she hadn't in a very long time. Hope. She glanced at Officer Ryan, who gave her a small nod. She knew she had found someone who believed in her, someone who wouldn't turn away. And for the first time, She dared to believe that better days were ahead. The days following Julia's arrest were a whirlwind of change for Sophia. The oppressive shadow that had loomed over her for so long was gone, but the scars, both visible and invisible, remained. Her life was no longer a quiet storm of suffering, but rebuilding her world would take time, patience, and love. Michael, overwhelmed by guilt, made a vow to his daughter. He began taking time off work, his once distant presence now replaced by unwavering devotion. He would sit with her during meals, read her favorite stories before bed, and simply listen, something he hadn't done in far too long. One afternoon, as they sat in the backyard under the dappled sunlight, Michael finally broke the silence. "Sophia," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I can't undo the pain you've been through. But I promise from now on, you won't face it alone. We'll face it together." Sophia's small smile was the first glimmer of hope he had seen in her for years. Michael enrolled Sophia in therapy, where she began unpacking the years of trauma she had endured. It wasn't easy. There were days when she couldn't speak, her words caught in the tangle of fear and doubt Julia had instilled in her. But with each session, Sophia began to find her voice again. Her therapist introduced her to new ways of expressing her feelings, encouraging her to continue drawing. At first, her sketches remained dark, haunted by echoes of the past. But gradually, brighter colors began to emerge, shades of blue skies and golden sunbeams replacing the oppressive blacks and grays. Sophia's art transformed from a cry for help into a celebration of resilience. She drew scenes of hope, a small child breaking free from chains, a vibrant garden blooming after a storm, and finally, a picture of herself holding hands with her father under a shining sun. Her therapist, inspired by the power of Sophia's work, suggested sharing her drawings with others. Hesitant at first, Sophia agreed, realizing her art could help children like her feel seen and understood. An exhibition at a local community center displayed her pieces, accompanied by short descriptions of her journey. People from all walks of life came to see her work, many moved to tears by the raw emotion and ultimate hope her drawings conveyed. One visitor, a young boy, tugged on his mother's sleeve as they stood before a drawing of a girl escaping a dark room. "She's just like me," he whispered. Sophia's bravery sparked conversations in Willow Creek and beyond. Her story encouraged others to look more closely at the children around them, to ask questions, and to act when something seemed wrong. For Sophia, the greatest reward wasn't the recognition. It was the knowledge that her voice had made a difference. She had been silenced for so long, but now her story had the power to inspire change. As the months turned into years, Sophia grew into a confident young woman. Her art continued to evolve, reflecting not just her journey but the resilience of countless others like her. Her final drawing in the community exhibition was simple yet profound. A child standing on a bridge, reaching toward the horizon where the sun was rising. Below it, she had written a single line: "Darkness doesn't last forever." Sophia's story, once hidden behind closed doors, became a beacon of hope. It reminded the world of the importance of vigilance, empathy, and the courage to speak up for those who cannot. For Michael and Sophia, the future was no longer overshadowed by the pain of the past. Together they walked forward into a brighter tomorrow. Do you feel the weight of Sophia's journey? Her courage to speak out, even when silenced for so long, is a reminder of how important it is to recognize and act against injustice. If you were in Sophia's place, or if you knew someone like her, what would you do? Would you have the strength to fight for what's right? Take a moment to reflect on her story and let us know your thoughts. Your feedback matters. It helps us grow, share better stories, and reach those who need them most. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and comment below. By sharing, you might inspire someone else to make a difference. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. There are so many more powerful stories waiting for you, stories that will move, inspire, and empower. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Here's to a brighter and kinder world. Wishing you a wonderful day filled with hope and positivity.